You know the words of that song that we just sang, the opening song, Just When I Need Him Most? Just when I need Him most. Jesus is near to comfort and cheer just when I need Him most. What happens when He doesn't seem to be there to comfort and cheer just when I need Him most? What if He's late? Our sermon today revolves around this issue. You can tell by the scripture reading that we're taking this sermon from John 11, verses 1 through 44. And we'll kind of pick this up from the point where the reading ended here in the scripture reading. So the sister sent word to Jesus, Lazarus is sick. The one who you love is sick. You know who Lazarus and Martha and Mary were to Christ? They were a place where He could go and rest, where they had unconditional love. They didn't test Him. They didn't ask for things. You could show up anytime at their house, and they would take care of you, let you rest, let that whole gang of guys with you, contentious guys, stay. I don't know what Lazarus did for a living, but he obviously took care of the living part of it. We know about Martha and Mary, their particular characteristics from other stories in the Bible. And then one day they had a need. Lazarus was sick. And they sent to Jesus and said, the one that you love is sick. And when he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it's for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. And then it goes on to say in verse 5, now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So what did He do? So when He heard that Lazarus was sick, He stayed where he was 2 more days. He stayed where he was 2 more days. Now, he was a couple of days north of Jerusalem. Lazarus lived in the town of Bethany, which was just south of Jerusalem. And he was about 2 days north. He was up there for a reason. The Jews were getting really agitated in the Jerusalem area and were plotting to kill him. And so they had moved their ministry up north. And then he said to this, he stayed there 2 more days, and then he said to his disciples, let us go back to Judea. He stayed there 2 more days. And then it took 2 days to get back. 4 days. Meanwhile, what happened during that time? Lazarus died. Matter of fact, Lazarus almost was dead by the time the message got to Christ. Did He love Lazarus? Yes. You bet He did. If there was anybody that you could say that He held in high regard, it would be Lazarus and his 2 sisters. People that He loved dearly. Now, this story reminds me of some personal stories. When you're not a real preacher, your sermons are about things you know. I've always admired a preacher that can get up. I've got a son-in-law that's a preacher, and he gets up every Sabbath with a new thing. He never preaches the same thing twice. I don't know how he does it. But when you're a lay person and they say, do you have a sermon? Oh, yeah, I've got something. I've been listening to a song, and I've got some things I've been thinking about. It put me back thinking about a story, and some of you have heard this story before. But I realize there's a little different twist to it than what I've emphasized in the past. It's a story about sick puppies and bad business. Now, when I was in high school, in academy, my folks moved to Oceanside, California, And my dad bought a pet shop, of all things. And my mom had her gift shop next door. And the summer after my sophomore year, I went to a junior academy and I stayed home. But my junior year was coming up. It was time to go off to the academy. And some things had been happening business-wise. Now, I was aware of this because I worked in the store during the summers and vacations and whatever. But during the early part of the summer, there was a plague of distemper which went through the town of Oceanside. Distemper is a disease that affects dogs and usually ends in their death. There was a plague of distemper that went through Oceanside. Now, my dad sold dogs. He sold puppies in the store. And when somebody had bought a puppy and they died right away, they came back with the receipt to my dad and said, I want my money back. You sold me a dog that died. Now, I knew my dad. I knew how he ran business. The customer was always right, so I knew he was going to give them their money back. Then you had people that were coming back that had bought the dog a month before the disease ever hit the town, and they died, and they come back and so you sold me a dead dog. My dad paid them their money back. And we even had one person, I remember, came back, they'd got a puppy 2 months before the disease hit town. They came back and wanted their money back. He gave it to them. Now, like a lot of kids, I wasn't really up on the family finances. I knew there was always food on the table and shoes on our feet. We didn't live high on the hog, but we had a little business, and little businesses work by having the family do the work, and so all of the payroll is inside the family. And I knew about my own finances, but I wasn't paying careful attention to my folks, never really had to worry about it. Until we came up time, it was getting close to go to the academy, and after worship one night, my dad said, "We've got to talk." And I said, "We don't have any money to send you to the academy. You want to go to the academy, don't you?" And I said, "Well, yeah." This whole concept of not having any money was new to me. And so I said, "Let's pray about it." So we knelt down, Mom and Dad and me, and my dad prayed. And some of you heard this story as a story about Christian education, and it is, but there's more to it. My dad prayed, and he asked the Lord, what should we do? We didn't have any money, but it was time to go to the academy. And then when he was done, he thanked the Lord, he got up off his knees, and he said, "Well, that settles it." And I'm going like, "What? What, Dad?" And he said, "That settles it. You're going to the academy." And I was kind of shocked because I hadn't heard the Lord say anything to him. But it was like, Dad said, that's the answer to our prayers. And so I went to the academy. We had no money. I went to the academy. I room with my best friend, Stan, and we both got jobs in the cafeteria. We got jobs washing dishes. These were the ones that came in off your trays. We would kind of pre-wash them, put them in these other trays, and send them through the dishwasher and to sanitize them. And that job paid about $80 a month. I was making 85 cents an hour. For those of you who are shocked by that, I was making about 85 cents an hour at that job, and we made about $80 a month, and our school bill was $160. It's $160 a month to go to the academy. And $80 a month wasn't making it. But I didn't get the bills. I was at the academy, I was doing my thing. I was aware of how much I made every month. I was aware of what the total cost was. But Dad apparently had gotten some answer to prayer, and so I didn't think anything about it. And time went on. I'm making $80 a month washing dishes. It's $160 a month. Obviously, we're running behind by $80 a month every month. 4 months went by. 4 months went by. And then an odd thing happened. It was the Sabbath right before Thanksgiving leave. And a misunderstanding had occurred between me and the dean. The dean had made a big thing in worship a few weeks before about not lending your room key out to everybody. And so earlier in that week, we were having dinner in the Grove, as we always had on a Tuesday night, outside. And my roommate came up to me in line and he said, you know, so-and-so here wants to borrow my skates, but I don't have my key. Can he borrow your key? And I said, sure, but listen, you know, they don't want us to be sharing these keys around, so keep it kind of on the down low, you know. We didn't have that expression back then, but a lot of stuff we had was real radical. And so I sent him off. It turned out that the vice principal was right behind me in line, which I knew that, but I didn't think anything about that. It also turned out that they had lost a master key to the school. Everything. The master key to everything. And they had lost it, and they were afraid that some student had gotten hold of it, and no telling what kind of mischief would ensue. And so the vice principal overheard part of my conversation, and he misconstrued it, and he told the dean, I think this guy may have the master key. So we had to do the lunch service. It was the Sabbath dinner. I had to run down from church to my dorm and get changed to go up to be in time to start with the dishes up there. And the dean saw me, and he confronted me in my room and accused me of being this mastermind that had got this master key. And the dean had this neat little trick, which was that if he thought that you had done something, he always acted like he knew you had done something. And he would confront you with that. We know that you've done this. There's no sense in lying about it. Confess. And almost everybody broke down. And so he accused me of this, and I'm going like, what are you talking about? And he said, you've got this master key thing. I know you've got it. And I said, no, I don't. And we argued. I mean, we really argued. We ended up nose to nose, which is harder because I was taller than him, but not by much. Nose to nose, yelling at each other in my room. And he wouldn't back down, and I told him, what you've heard is a misunderstanding. It was my room key. And you might not be able to imagine this, those of you that know me, but when I thought there was an injustice upon myself, I got quite vigorous in my defense. And so we were shouting at each other. He finally was like, well, you know, we're going to have to take this up later. And he walked out. Well, 3 days later it was the night before we went off on Thanksgiving leave. He called me to the office. And I thought, oh no, he's going to bring this thing up again. Here we go again. I was ready to fight because, you know, justice. So he calls me into the office and just surprised me to death. He says, I want you to be one of my monitors. The guy that's in your wing can't hack it, and I want you to be one of my monitors. Now, for those of you that didn't go to academy back in the old days, nowadays they call monitors, they call them something nice. They call them resident assistants. But a monitor was kind of the cop. Monitors were not liked by everybody because you told kids your own age what to do. And the last job I ever wanted in the academy was to be a monitor. This was not the way to friendship and freedom. And I told the dean, I says, that is the last thing in the world that I would want to do. And he said, but Don, he says, I know you need the money. And he said, you'll get paid $1 an hour, and I can guarantee you, your first month, you'll make enough to pay your whole bill, $160. And he said, just don't give me an answer now. Go home and talk to your folks about it, and then give me an answer when you come back. Well, I went back and I talked to my folks about it, and it was obvious to me. You know, I mean, we had no money, and I had to do my part. And it wasn't something I really wanted to do, but I had to do my part. So I went back and I took the job. First month I made 160. After that I made no less than 160. It ranged over the next year and a half through my senior year anywhere from the 160 up to $300 a month. There was a guy that worked on the farm that made more than me. He always beat me every month, but we worked a lot of hours. We worked a lot of hours because we weren't just sitting there resident assisting in the dorm during study hall, but we had to be the cop on the beat for everything, including, every meal. We were up there taking care of things, making sure everything ran right, made it so a faculty member could stay at home a little bit. And it was a lot of hours. I actually liked the job. I loved the dean, and he loved me. But it was not what I expected. And as I was thinking about this, first I was listening to this song that we're going to have in a while. And then I was thinking about it, and I was thinking about this thing. I've always told this story as a story about faith, my father's faith in going ahead and sending me off to academy. A story about Christian education. The Lord will work it out. It looks too expensive for you to be able to afford it. The Lord will work it out. I've always told that story about that. But as I was thinking about this, I was thinking, but Dad had to wait 4 months for an answer. And each month it was getting worse. 4 months late. It turned out that, as best I can figure it, by the time I ended up my senior year, I had paid off everything, and I was ahead a couple of $100. It turned out when I went to La Sierra College that there was an entrance fee of $200 that my dad paid, and I paid everything else from that point forward. And it occurred to me that from the moment that my dad stood up from that prayer and said it's settled, he never had to pay another dime for 6 years of my Christian education. But what a wait that they must have had to go through. Didn't bother me at the time because I wasn't getting the bills. But I mean, what a wait of faith. There was a more personal incident because that story didn't teach me what it needed to until later in life. But I went to college, went to La Sierra, got married. Everybody got married in college. I was the last guy that got married. I was a junior. Everybody was married. And I had gone in with a multiple degree kind of thing, but ended up with physics, which was my first love. When I went into college in the mid-'60s, physicists could walk the earth like gods. The NASA, some of you are familiar with this NASA concept, was running full bore. There was no amount of anything that you couldn't do. Throw money at every question. I mean, we're beating the Soviets, and we beat them. We beat them like a bad donkey. But there was money galore, and there was a war on. And there was a lot of money pouring into the military budget. And so I'm thinking, man, I get a degree in physics, I'm golden. My wife is thinking, he gets a degree in physics, and this poor slacker might turn out to be worth something. When I graduated, it turned out to be the first year in, I don't know, since World War II, or probably since before the Depression, that we balanced the budget. Dear Richard Nixon, bless his heart, decided he was going to balance the budget that year. Now, there was a war on, and he was trying to draw that down, but there wasn't much you can do with the budget. You can't balance the budget with Social Security and all that kind of stuff. You have to balance it with your discretionary funds. And so all the science stuff, NASA, all the other science work in the country, I mean, it went down the tubes. I graduate right into this wonderful scenario. And I've got a bachelor's degree in physics, which is, you could have got a good job, but it wasn't, it wasn't the highest degree you could get. And there was no jobs. There were guys with PhDs that were on the street. And I didn't even know how to look for a job. So I start sending out to wherever I can see places looking for a job. Because, it was, I graduated in the winter quarter. I graduated in January. And so I had to have a job going forward. But I'm desperate for work. I don't know how to get work. There's no work to be found. I remember I sent off to a couple of places. I sent off to a place in La Jolla, a brand new company that had just started, Science Applications Incorporated. Some of you may know of it. They didn't want me. And I sent off to a company, Command Sciences, in Colorado Springs. I thought, man, Colorado, I would love to go to Colorado. I'd love that. We even got a little pamphlet thing that showed all about different areas of Colorado. It's heaven. And but nothing is happening. Meanwhile, per an agreement that I had to make with Sheila, I shouldn't say had to make, but I made with Sheila when we got married, which was that she could have a child before she was 25. Well, that child was coming, and I'm looking for work, and I'm getting nowhere. I finally now, please forgive me, the teachers in the crowd, but I finally got desperate enough, I thought maybe I could teach. And so I found this book that had all of the schools, the churches, the hospitals, all of the officers and people that worked for the conference, for the general conference all around the world, big thick book. And I got that book and I wrote to all the academies and sent them a little resume. I mean, I had no teaching credentials or desire to teach, but I sent out to them. And then I thought, well, I'm not getting anything back from them. I knew enough to know that they hired between February and May or June at the latest. So I sent out to the conference education secretaries also, sent a resume out, just blind all of them. And I remembered the story that I told you earlier about the faith of my father. And I decided that, look, God is going to take care of us. He will honor our faith. We're paying our tithe, what little it is. We're throwing a few bucks in the offering. We're trying to do what's right. And He'll take care of us. Something will happen. And I figured out when it would have to be. I figured out the latest date that this would happen. I knew that it would happen before the 2nd of June. The 2nd of June. Now, I knew that because I thought, now, if these guys hire me, some yahoo from nowhere with no teaching stuff, they're going to want to send me to summer school to start working on these teaching credentials. And summer school started the 2nd of June at La Sierra College. And so I knew that as we got closer to that date, I had a couple of nibbles, nothing. But as I got closer to that date, I knew that God would save us before the 2nd of June. We could count on it. So what happened? The 2nd of June came. Nothing. The 3rd of June came. Nothing. The 4th of June came. And I'm kind of discouraged. I'm thinking, Lord, this has to be. If this doesn't work, what am I going to do? I've got to have some work. And the deadline is passed. What is going to happen? On the 4th of June in that year, Ward Scriven, the conference education secretary for the Colorado Conference, called me on the phone that night and said, I got your resume here, and it says that you have some math. And I'm going like, well, yeah. And he said, we've got a 10th grade junior academy in Grand Junction, Colorado, and we need a teacher, a secondary teacher, that can teach math and history and whatever. And I'm going, okay. And he said, you'd be willing to do that? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, you're hired. He hired me with no teaching experience, no teaching credentials, no nothing, over the phone, without ever seeing my face. But he hired me 2 days late. And I said, but summer school has already started, and I can't get those teaching credentials. I'd have to wait until the next session. He says, no, don't worry about that. I'll take care of it. They'll let you start. Don't worry about it. You go down tomorrow and enroll, and we'll take care of that. 2 days late, I had set time for God. I used logic. I used numbers. I used my intellect. And I figured out what it should be. And I think that God wanted me to know that I should not bother him with those kind of things. That I should just sit back and trust him to make it work. That I should not worry about how many days it should be, but to just go on about my business. It's interesting, in John 11, starting in verse 11, we go back and it says, after he had said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up. And the disciples were like, great. If you've got a fever, if you finally fall asleep, that means that everything is starting to get better. But Jesus then told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him. This doesn't have anything to do with our sermon, but I love that verse 16. Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, also known as Thomas the doubter, said to the rest of the disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. On his arrival in Bethany, Martha and Mary were still in the morning period. Martha, being Martha, was probably out taking care of things. Mary, being Mary, was in the back room, still emotional, being comforted by friends and so on. So it goes on to say in verse 28, and after she had said this, I got to back up. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know even now that God will give you whatever you ask. And he said, your brother will rise again. And she's thinking, yes, in the resurrection. But what does that do for us now? She sent back for her sister Mary, and they came out, and Jesus said, show me the grave. And Martha said, but said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there's a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days. But Jesus said, take away the stone. Remove the stone. And he called out for Lazarus to come forth. Mrs. White says that if he hadn't put Lazarus in that sentence, all the dead would have come forth. Why didn't he do something immediately? These were his best friends. Why did he not do anything immediately? When the word came to him, it was, Jesus, come quick. But by that time, it had already been 2 days. Lazarus died that day. He may have already been dead when Jesus got the word. But do you remember the story about the centurion and his servant? He came and he asked Jesus, will you heal my servant? And Jesus said, all right, I'll go with you. And he said, no, you don't even need to bother. You can heal him at a distance. I know you have this authority to do that. Why couldn't he have healed Lazarus at a distance? Why not raise him from the dead at a distance? Spare them 4 days of grief. Why not? Sometimes in the Bible, when you hear a story about somebody that's been raised from the dead, where they'll say, so-and-so has just died, the son, the daughter, the mother-in-law, and the person, whether it be Christ or one of the disciples, goes up to that person, goes to their room, and they are returned to life. But you know, there are people today who claim they have died, right? You hear that story all the time. It always makes me mad. They say, I died on the operating table, or I died, What they mean is that their heart quit working briefly, and it kind of flatlined. But they aren't dead, because you don't come back from death. I mean, part of them wasn't working, but not all of them wasn't working. And I think that sometimes when people could hear, even as we come down 2,000 years later, you hear stories about a person being raised from the dead, you might have a tendency, if you're a skeptic, to think, well, maybe they weren't really dead. They didn't know anything back then. Maybe they were in just kind of a deep coma. They couldn't tell. But 4 days, there is no possible explanation. Jesus went and he raised Lazarus from the dead after he was 4 days dead. 4 days late from what the sisters wanted. And even to this day, nobody can gainsay that particular thing. It also was an action that led up to the final part of Christ's life here on earth. Because the Jews who wanted to do away with him, the leadership that wanted to do away with him, but they were afraid because of the crowd. But this scared the liver out of them. This was incontrovertible evidence that this was the Messiah, the Son of God. And they began immediately to plan actively to do away with Christ. Sometimes God answers our prayers before we even think about them. Sometimes he saves us when we don't even know that he saved us. Sometimes we ask him and we get an answer right then. Sometimes maybe we have to wait. Sometimes maybe we have to wait. And there is a bigger picture to be seen. That doesn't make you feel any better, but there's a bigger picture to be seen. You may be fighting a battle of fear. You've cried to the Lord, I need you now, but he has not appeared. Friend, don't be discouraged, because he's still the same. He'll soon be here. He'll roll back the stone, and he'll call out your name. I know there are some people, there's always times in our life, and there's probably people here today that are living a battle of fear, that are worried. You don't know how the Lord is going to save you, and he hasn't come when you wanted. But don't be discouraged. Leave it all up to him. Don't do your own math. Let him take care of the math. Let him take care of the calendars. Let him take care of you. And he will, in every case.